The old woman almost didn't open the door. The storm was brutal, snow piling higher than the steps, wind cutting through the trees like a warning. At her age, answering a knock in the middle of the night wasn't just risky. But then she heard it, not knocking, whimpering, when she opened the door. 2 dogs sat frozen on her porch, snow clinging to their fur, eyes sharp but exhausted. They didn't bark. They didn't beg. They just waited. One of them was shaking so badly it could barely sit. She brought them inside, wrapped them in blankets, and stayed awake all night, feeding them by hand, whispering to them like children she never had around anymore. By morning, the dogs were asleep. That's when the sirens came, and as she stood trembling in her doorway, one officer looked at the dogs and said something that made her blood run cold. "Ma'am, these dogs were never supposed to be found alive. Before we start, make sure to hit like, share, and subscribe. And really, I'm curious, where are you watching from? Drop your country name in the comments. I love seeing how far our stories travel." The storm had been building since sunset. By the time night fully settled in, snow fell sideways, slamming against the windows of the small, weather-beaten house at the edge of town. The wind howled through the trees like something alive, rattling the old woman's bones as much as the walls around her. Evelyn Harper sat alone in her kitchen, wrapped in a thick wool sweater, a single lamp glowing beside her. At 73, she'd learned to ignore noise of storms. Out here, winter always screamed. Tonight felt no different until it did. A sound cut through the wind. Soft, uneven, scratch, pause, scratch. Evelyn froze, her teacup hovering halfway to her lips. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't the trees. It came. Again, closer now, weaker. Her heart began to pound. No one came to her house at night. Not neighbors. Not family. Not anymore. She told herself it was nothing, that the storm was playing tricks on her ears. Then came a faint whimper, but barely a sound at all. Evelyn set the cup down with trembling hands and rose from her chair. Each step toward the door felt heavier than the last. Through the frosted glass, she saw only darkness and swirling white. She hesitated. Opening the door in a storm like this was dangerous, but leaving someone or something outside felt worse. She turned the handle. The wind exploded inward, icy and violent. Snow rushed across the floor, and standing on her porch were 2 shapes, dark, shaking, barely upright. Dogs. One collapsed instantly, hitting the wood with a dull thud. The other stood rigid, eyes locked on her, breath coming out in sharp, desperate bursts. Their fur was soaked. Their bodies trembled uncontrollably. Ice clung to their whiskers. Evelyn gasped. She didn't ask where they came from. She didn't wonder why they were there. She dropped to her knees, pulling the door wider. "Come inside," she whispered. "Oh, you poor things. Come inside." And without knowing it, Evelyn Harper had just stepped into a story that would change her life forever. Evelyn Harper had lived in that house for 41 years, long enough for the paint to fade, long enough for the porch steps to creak beneath familiar weight, long enough for the world outside her windows to slowly move on without her. She hadn't always been alone. Once, the house had been loud with life, morning radios, shared meals, muddy shoes left by the door. Her husband, Thomas, used to joke that the walls themselves felt warmer when people laughed inside them. But laughter had a way of leaving quietly. First when their children grew up and moved away. Then all at once, the night Thomas never came home from his shift at the mill. The house changed after that. Neighbors checked in at first. Friends brought casseroles. Then weeks turned into months, and sympathy faded into distance. Evelyn didn't blame them. Everyone had lives to return to. So she made one for herself. She woke early, kept the house clean, fed the birds every morning, even in winter, scattering seeds across the snow with gloved hands. She spoke softly to herself as she worked, not because she was lonely, she told herself, But because silence felt heavier when it went unanswered, the town knew her as kind, harmless, the woman who waved from her porch and baked too much bread, the woman who never locked her door during the day because she believed fear only invited more of it. But there were things the town didn't know. They didn't know how quiet nights could stretch. How memories grew louder when nothing else did. How helping something weaker than herself reminded her she still mattered. So when those dogs appeared in the storm, Evelyn didn't see trouble. She saw cold. She saw fear. She saw two lives hanging on by the thinnest thread, and without hesitation, without imagining police lights or sirens or consequences, she did what she had always done. She opened her door. Up close, the dogs looked worse than Evelyn had feared. She shut the door against the storm and leaned her weight into it, breathing hard. Snow melted into dark puddles across the kitchen floor as the dogs staggered inside. Their bodies shook violently, not from fear, but from cold so deep it had settled into their bones. The larger one stood between her and the door, legs braced wide as if instinctively guarding the space. The other, slightly smaller, darker around the muzzle, took 3 unsteady steps before collapsing again, this time with a low, painful whine. Evelyn knelt beside him at once. His fur was stiff with ice. When she pressed her fingers into it, the skin beneath felt frighteningly cold. His chest rose and fell in shallow, uneven breaths. Every exhale rattled like air scraping past something damaged. She reached for the other dog, expecting him to flinch. He didn't. Instead, he watched her hands closely, eyes sharp and focused despite the exhaustion dragging at his body. There was no panic in his gaze, no confusion, just awareness. That's when Evelyn noticed the collars. Thick, black, reinforced, not the kind sold at pet stores. No tags, no names, no jingling metal, only a dull functional buckle that looked designed for strength, not decoration. One collar was torn, the edge frayed as if it had been cut or ripped away. Her stomach tightened. The limping dog shifted, revealing a dark patch beneath his fur. When she brushed it aside, her breath caught blood, not fresh but not old either. A long scrape ran across his side, crusted and swollen, as if he'd pushed himself far beyond his limit, just to reach her door. Evelyn swallowed hard. She had taken care of animals before. Farm dogs, strays, even a wounded fox once. But these dogs were different. They were disciplined in their pain, silent, alert. Even now, half frozen and injured, they seemed to be listening for something beyond her walls. As Evelyn wrapped them in blankets and turned the heater higher, one thought pressed heavily against her chest. Whatever these dogs had been running from, they were terrified of being found. Evelyn moved on instinct. She fetched every blanket she owned, old quilts from the hallway closet, a faded throw from the couch, even the wool cover she used on the spare bed. She spread them across the kitchen floor, layering warmth where there had only been cold moments before. The dogs watched her closely. The injured one didn't resist when she carefully lifted his head, sliding a folded towel beneath his chest. His eyes fluttered, then closed, exhaustion finally overpowering whatever had carried him through the storm. The other dog never lay down. He stood near the door, body angled outward, ears twitching at every sound the wind carried. Even inside the warmth of the house, his posture remained rigid, ready, as if he were still on duty. Evelyn filled a bowl with lukewarm water and set it between them. The standing dog sniffed once, then nudged the bowl toward the injured one before taking a single drink himself. That made her pause. Most animals rushed water when they were cold and scared. This one waited. She turned the heater up as high as it would go. The old unit groaned in protest, coughing warm air into the room. Slowly, painfully slowly, the trembling eased. The injured dog's breathing smoothed out. each rise of his chest a little deeper than the last. Evelyn sat on the floor with them, her knees aching, her hands resting uselessly in her lap. She whispered soft words she couldn't remember learning. Comfort sounds meant more for herself than for them. Easy now. You're safe. You're warm. The standing dog finally shifted, lowering himself just enough to sit but not sleep. His eyes never left the windows. Every gust of wind made his muscles tense. Outside, the storm raged. Inside, something else had begun. Evelyn felt it settle in her bones, the sense that this wasn't chance. That these dogs hadn't wandered in randomly. They had chosen her house. And as she watched the fire flicker and the dogs breathe, one unsettling truth crept into her thoughts. If someone came looking for them tonight, they wouldn't leave quietly. By the time the clock crept past midnight, the storm outside had softened, but the tension inside the house had not. Evelyn sat at the kitchen table, hands wrapped around a mug that had long since gone cold. The dogs lay on the blankets near the heater, but something about the scene refused to feel peaceful. The injured one slept deeply now, chest rising and falling in slow, heavy breaths. But the other never rested. He paced, not aimlessly, not nervously. Precisely. Every few minutes, he stopped at the front window, nose lifting as if testing the air. Then the back door. Then the hallway that led to the bedrooms. Each pass followed the same route, the same pauses, the same alert stillness, as if he were checking positions, not rooms. Evelyn noticed the way his ears moved, not randomly. They flicked toward distant sounds she couldn't hear. The creak of a branch. The faint crack of ice shifting in the woods. Once, he froze completely, muscles locking, head angled toward the tree line beyond her yard. Evelyn held her breath. Nothing happened, but the dog didn't relax. She had owned dogs before. Friendly ones. Nervous ones. Protective ones. This was different. This wasn't fear. It was anticipation. When she rose from her chair, the dog moved instantly, stepping between her and the sleeping dog without growling, without baring teeth. Just a silent repositioning, deliberate and controlled. "I'm not going anywhere," she whispered. More to him than to herself. He studied her face for a long moment, then stepped aside. That unsettled her more than a snarl ever could have. As the hours dragged on, Evelyn began to understand something she hadn't wanted to admit. These dogs weren't lost. They weren't wandering. They were hiding. And whatever they feared wasn't the storm. It was the morning. Sleep never came. Evelyn lay on the couch, blanket pulled to her chin, listening to the old clock tick through the dark. Every few minutes, the standing dog shifted position, nails clicking softly against the floor. Each sound made her eyes snap open. Sometime after 3, both dogs froze. The injured one stirred, lifting his head weakly. The other rose instantly, body stiff, ears forward, staring toward the back of the house, toward the woods beyond the yard. A low growl rolled from his chest. Not loud. Not threatening. A warning. Evelyn's heart hammered. She strained to hear what he heard, but the night offered nothing but wind and distant trees. After a long moment, the dog relaxed just slightly, but he didn't lie down again. Neither did Evelyn. When dawn finally crept through the curtains, pale and cold, she felt relief wash over her. And fear tighten its grip, because whatever those dogs were waiting for, daylight was bringing it. Morning arrived without announcement. No sirens. No footsteps. No voices calling out from the road. Just silence. Evelyn woke to pale winter light, stretching across the kitchen floor. The storm finally spent. Snow lay untouched outside, smooth and blindingly white, as if the night had never happened. For a moment, she allowed herself to breathe. The injured dog slept deeply, curled beneath a stack of blankets, chest rising steadily. Color had returned faintly to his nose. His breathing no longer rattled. It was the first sign that the night's gamble had been worth it. The other dog sat upright beside him, unmoving. He hadn't slept. His eyes followed Evelyn as she rose, careful not to wake the injured one. When she stepped toward the stove, he adjusted his position subtly, never blocking her, never crowding her, but never turning his back either. She brewed coffee and watched steam rise into the quiet air. The house felt strangely peaceful, like the calm after a long-held breath. Even the heater hummed softly, as if aware this moment was fragile. Evelyn knelt beside the dogs and reached out. This time, when her hand brushed the standing dog's shoulder, he didn't tense. He leaned into her touch. The injured dog stirred, letting out a low sigh as he shifted closer to the warmth. His tail thumped once against the blanket, weak, but deliberate. Evelyn smiled despite herself. "See?" she whispered. "You made it." Outside, the world remained still. No cars passed. No neighbors stepped out. Snow swallowed every sound. Then, far in the distance, something broke the silence, a faint hum, low, steady. Evelyn frowned and moved to the window. Squinting down the empty road, the standing dog rose instantly. His body stiffened. His gaze locked forward. And whatever peace the morning had offered vanished in a single heartbeat, because silence like this never lasted. The sound grew louder. Not wind, not machinery. Sirens. Evelyn single quotes as stomach dropped. She watched from the window as flashing lights spilled across the snow, red and blue cutting violently through the quiet morning. One car slowed near her driveway. Then another. And another. They didn't pass by. They stopped. Within seconds, the narrow road was blocked. Doors opened. Boots crunched against snow. Voices carried short, sharp commands spoken with purpose. Police. Evelyn staggered back from the window, her heart racing. Her first thought was confusion. Her second was fear. She hadn't done anything wrong. She hadn't even left the house. So why were they here? Behind her, the standing dog moved. He didn't bark. He didn't growl. He stepped forward and positioned himself between Evelyn and the door, body angled outward, muscles tight beneath his fur. The injured dog stirred at the sound, lifting his head weakly as if sensing danger even through exhaustion. A knock hit the door. Hard. Official. "Police." A voice called. "Ma'am, we need you to open the door." Evelyn's hands trembled as she clutched the back of a chair. Her mind raced through possibilities, mistakes, misunderstandings, neighbors calling in concerns. Had someone seen the dogs come in? Had she broken some rule without knowing? Another knock. Louder this time. The standing dog glanced back at her. Eyes sharp and alert. Waiting. Watching. "It's all right," she whispered. Though she wasn't sure who she was trying to convince, she moved slowly toward the door, heart pounding so hard it hurt. Outside, more officers spread out, positioning themselves around the house, surrounding it. As Evelyn reached for the handle, a terrifying thought settled in her chest. Whatever those dogs were running from, it had found them. And now it was standing on her doorstep. Evelyn's hand hovered inches from the door handle. She couldn't make it move. Her heart pounded so violently she felt dizzy, each beat echoing in her ears. Police didn't surround houses like this for misunderstandings. They didn't block roads and spread out across yards because of a noise complaint. Something was wrong, very wrong. Her thoughts spiraled. Had the dogs belonged to someone dangerous? Were they stolen? Had she unknowingly sheltered something she shouldn't have? Every kind act she'd made through the night now twisted into doubt, each one suddenly feeling reckless instead of kind. Behind her, the standing dog shifted again. He didn't retreat. He didn't advance. He waited. That terrified her more than a bark ever could. Another knock hit the door, sharper this time, rattling the frame. "Ma'am," the voice called again, calmer but firmer. "Please open the door." Evelyn swallowed hard. Her knees felt weak. She pressed a trembling hand to her chest, steadying herself against the counter. "I was only trying to help," she whispered to the empty room. "I didn't know." The injured dog let out a soft sound behind her, a breath, a sigh, barely there. She turned and saw his eyes watching her now, tired but trusting. That broke something inside her. Tears blurred her vision. She wiped them away angrily. Crying wouldn't help. Panic wouldn't either. Slowly, carefully, she reached for the door and turned the lock. The click sounded impossibly loud in the quiet house. Before opening it, she took one last look at the dogs, at the blankets, at the warmth, at the fragile safety they'd built together overnight. Whatever happened next, she realized, couldn't be undone. She opened the door and stepped into the cold with fear wrapped tightly around her heart. The officer at the front didn't reach for his weapon. That was the first thing Evelyn noticed. He stood with his hands visible, posture calm but alert, eyes moving briefly past her, toward the warmth of the house behind her. 2 more officers flanked the porch. Others remained spread across the yard, radios murmuring softly. "Ma'am," the lead officer said gently, "we need to ask you a few questions." Evelyn nodded, though her mouth felt dry. "Did 2 dogs come into your home last night?" he asked. Her breath caught. "Yes," she said quickly. "They were freezing. One of them was hurt. I didn't know who they belonged to. The officer raised a hand, stopping her. "That's not what we're asking," he said. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded photograph. Then another. He held them out, letting her see. Evelyn's hands shook as she took them. The images showed 2 dogs running through snow, but not like strays. Their bodies were lean, powerful. Their movements sharp and purposeful. Both wore the same thick collars, now lying on her kitchen floor. Her stomach dropped. "Ma'am," the officer said quietly, "did either of these dogs show aggression toward you?" Evelyn looked up, stunned. "No," she said. "Never." The officer exhaled slowly, as if that answer mattered more than anything else. Then he asked the question that made her knees weaken. "Did they choose to come to your house?" Evelyn opened her mouth to respond, but the truth hit her all at once. They hadn't wandered in. They had found her. And suddenly, she understood why the police weren't angry. They were afraid. The officer took the photographs back gently, as if they carried weight. "These dogs," he said, lowering his voice, "aren't strays." Evelyn felt her pulse in her throat. "They're trained," he continued. "Highly trained. They were part of a K-9 unit involved in a joint operation outside the county 3 nights ago." Another officer stepped forward, nodding. "Military support dogs," he added. "Not pets. Not civilian animals." Evelyn's legs nearly gave out. The officer explained slowly, carefully, like someone delivering fragile news. The dogs had gone missing during a classified operation in the forest north of town. There had been a vehicle incident, confusion, then silence. By morning, search teams found tracks leading into the storm. And then nothing. They were assumed lost, the officer said. Possibly killed. Evelyn's chest tightened as she pictured them on her porch, soaked, shaking, holding on by instinct alone. "They traveled miles in sub-zero temperatures," the officer went on. "Injured, disoriented, and instead of hiding, they came here." He looked at her directly now. "They chose light, warmth, a human who wasn't afraid of them." Behind Evelyn, the standing dog shifted, as if he understood his name being spoken somewhere in the conversation. The injured one let out a slow breath. "We didn't surround your house because you were in trouble," the officer said softly. "We did it because we didn't know how they'd react." Evelyn swallowed. "And now?" she asked. The officer hesitated. "Now," he said, "we need to figure out why they trusted you enough to stop running." The officers didn't rush inside. They waited. Evelyn stood there on the threshold. the cold seeping through her slippers, while the lead officer glanced past her once more toward the dogs resting just beyond the doorway. "They could have kept moving," he said quietly. "They're trained to survive, to hide, to evade." Evelyn nodded slowly. "But they didn't," he continued. "They passed other houses, empty barns, vehicles. They came here." She looked back at her kitchen, at the soft light glowing over blankets and bowls and warmth that hadn't been there the night before. It didn't look like a place someone planned to stop. It looked like a place someone hoped to. The officer's voice softened. "Your house was the only one with lights on for miles." That struck her harder than anything else. She remembered how she'd left the lamp burning out of habit. How she'd never liked the dark. How Thomas used to tease her for it, calling it her little rebellion against loneliness. "They were hypothermic," another officer added. "Injured. Pushing their limits. If they'd gone much farther." He didn't finish. Evelyn felt her throat tighten. She hadn't saved them because she was brave. She hadn't even thought. She'd simply done what she always did when the world felt too quiet. She made it warmer. "They weren't looking for a hiding place," the lead officer said. "They were looking for safety." Inside, the standing dog finally lay down beside his injured partner, pressing his body close. The movement was subtle but intentional. "He stayed awake all night," Evelyn said suddenly. "Watching, guarding." The officers exchanged looks. "Yes," one murmured. "That sounds like him." Evelyn smiled faintly, tears gathering in her eyes. "They didn't choose me," she said softly. "They chose kindness." The lead officer turned slightly, lowering his voice. "There's something else," he said. Evelyn's chest tightened. She had already learned more than she thought possible. Whatever came next felt heavier, like the truth had been waiting for the right moment to land. "One of the dogs didn't just get hurt running through the storm," the officer continued. "That injury you saw on his side?" Evelyn nodded slowly. "It wasn't from ice," he said. "It was a graze. A bullet." The word hit her like a blow. A bullet meant pursuit. It meant danger. It meant they hadn't just been lost. They'd been escaping. The operation went wrong. Another officer explained. Someone panicked. Shots were fired. The dogs broke away during the chaos. Evelyn's hands clenched at her sides as the night replayed in her mind. The way the standing dog never slept. The way he watched the windows. The way he growled toward the woods just before dawn. He wasn't guarding the house. She whispered. "He was guarding you," the officer said. Search teams had combed the forest all night. Not just for the dogs, but for a man who never made it back to his unit. A man who might still be out there, injured, desperate, dangerous. The dogs didn't just stop running, the officer said quietly. They made a decision. They chose to protect. Evelyn felt a shiver crawl up her spine, not from the cold, but from understanding. If someone had come to her door during the night, those dogs would have stood between her and anything else, and she realized then how close. She'd come to something far worse than fear. She'd come close to the edge of violence and never even known it. The officers stepped aside to let the handlers approach. They moved slowly, carefully, voices low, hands open, respect clear in every gesture. These weren't strangers to the dogs. They were people who knew their names, their commands, their histories. The standing dog rose. Immediately, not aggressively, not defensively. He simply placed himself in front of Evelyn, her breath caught. "It's okay," she whispered, though her voice shook. "They're here to help." The handler knelt, calling softly. The injured dog lifted his head, recognizing the voice, tail giving a weak thump against the blanket. Relief flickered across the handler's face, but the other dog didn't move. He glanced back at Evelyn just once, as if asking a question. She knelt beside him despite the cold, resting a hand against his neck. "You did your job," she said gently. "You kept us safe." The handler waited. No orders. No force. Finally, the dog stepped aside and allowed the injured one to be lifted onto a stretcher. Only when he was secured did the standing dog follow, walking calmly at the handler's side. As they led them toward the waiting vehicle, Evelyn felt the weight of the moment settle in her chest. She had opened her door to strangers, and in return, she had been trusted with something priceless. For one night, she had been their safe place, and sometimes that is enough. The house felt impossibly quiet after they left. Evelyn stood in her doorway long after the police vehicles disappeared down the road, their tire tracks cutting dark lines through the snow. The warmth inside her home lingered, but something essential had gone with them. She moved slowly back into the kitchen. The blankets lay folded now, the bowls empty, the heater humming to itself. There were no paw prints crossing the floor anymore. No watchful eyes following her steps. Just silence deeper than the one she'd known before the storm. She sank into her chair, hands resting in her lap. For one night, she hadn't been alone. Days passed. Then a letter arrived. It bore no return address, only an official seal and a note written in careful handwriting. It thanked her for her courage, for her discretion, for doing what training manuals could never teach. Enclosed was a photograph. Two dogs stood proudly beside their handlers, fur clean, eyes sharp, alive. One wore a faint scar along his side. The other stood slightly ahead, alert as ever, on the back. Someone had written, "They survived because you stayed." Evelyn pressed the photo to her chest, tears blurring her vision. She placed it on the mantel beside her husband's picture, right where the light from the window would touch it every morning, sometimes late at night. She still left the porch light on, not because she expected them to return, but because she understood something now. Kindness is a signal, a quiet one, a steady one, and sometimes, in the darkest storms, it's enough to guide someone home.